Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first asynchronous lecture of this course, How to Read and Write a Scientific Paper. First of all, thank you very much for your interest. Many of you have attended the first synchronous lecture given online, and therefore you have learned what is the basic structure of a scientific paper, what is the purpose of a scientific paper, and we already discussed what could be our motivation to read a scientific paper. With this video, I would like to get into more details on how scientific papers are structured, which helps, of course, in guiding us in how to read them. In order to provide a learning by doing approach, I will refer to a paper that has been recently published, which I would like to read with you during this video. The paper is authored by me, so it looks like I am self-serving. Actually, I prefer to start by reading with you one of my papers because, of course, I know very well the paper that I have authored, and I know very well the motivations that brought me to structure the paper in the way you can read it now. And therefore, I think it is a more meaningful example. I anticipate that in another video, I will read with you another paper, which I think is a very good example, which, of course, is not authored by me, in order to provide also a more independent example, independent of my view and my own perspective and my own knowledge of the paper that I am discussing with you today, which, of course, it's one of my papers, and therefore I know it quite well. So let's then look at the paper. Let me share my screen first so that we can see how the paper can be found, and we can see also some preliminary details. There are several ways in which you can look for a paper. I am referring here to Google Scholar. Google Scholar, scholar.google.com, is a web search tool for indeed finding scientific papers. But not only papers. Google Scholar also includes in the catalog books, abstracts submitted to conferences. So, of course, when you search in Google Scholar, it's important to be able to read the list and understand the list that Google Scholar is presenting. In this case, I looked in Google Scholar for my name, Montanari, and the name of one of my co-authors, Davide Zanchettin. And this search key allowed me to get, as the first paper in the list, the one that I am looking for. And you can see from the summary of Google Scholar some basic informations about the paper. First of all, the title, of course, and a list of authors which is not complete here. You can recognize that it's not complete because there are some dots at the beginning. In fact, you cannot see my name there. I am the first author, actually. You can see the journal. The name of the journal is not complete here, and other information. There is a couple of lines. There are a couple of lines describing the first reporting the first lines of the abstract. And then you can see some options in the links below the title and summary of the abstract. And one important information that is reported here is the number of citations. Here it's in Italian, but you can see that you can understand easily that there are 128 citations to this paper, which is quite a good number. it's quite a good number if you look at the date of publication. The paper was published less than 3 years ago, so more than 100 citations in 3 years is considered to be a very good number, at least for the field of geosciences, which is my field and the field the paper refers to. The number of citations is important because it clarifies the visibility that the paper got, and therefore it provides a summary of the interest of researchers in the paper itself. Keep in mind that these are the citations collected by Google Scholar. Google Scholar is searching the web with an automatic procedure, so is getting any type of citation, including those from blogs, including those from any web publication. And therefore, it's quite a very comprehensive overview. It doesn't, for instance, select only citations from scientific papers. And therefore, keep in mind that this net number may be an overestimation of the citations that come from scientific papers, which are, in a way, the most relevant if you want to gauge the interest of the scientific community. The most relevant thing, the most relevant indicator is the number of citations that come from scientific peer-reviewed papers. In this case, it's a comprehensive overview, which in a way gives you a very reliable idea of the interest of the scientific community. So let's then click on the paper and let's get into the web page of the journal. And here you can see also the extended journal title, which is another important indication of the visibility of the paper. Because basing on the impact factor of the journal, you can understand what is the visibility of the journal itself. Science Advances is a journal that is considered very good quality, is not really a very top journal. The very top journals are, to give you some examples, in the field of environmental sciences, natural sciences. The very top journals are Science, and then Nature, and then Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States. And then there are journals that are just a small step below in terms of visibility, and one of these is Science Advances, which is published by the same institution that publishes Science, but is, let's call me a journal with a lower visibility with respect to Science. Still, it's a very visible journal. So just try to get oriented when you are interested in a scientific paper in the panorama of the journals that focus on the specific subject and the visibility of these journals, because this is a first indication of the consideration that the paper has received from the scientific community. Okay, so let's look then at the title of the journal. The title, of course, provides a first important information because it presents the subject of the paper, and therefore it is the subject of the paper is what you are looking for, is what matches your interest, and therefore, indeed, the title presents this important indication, but it's not the only one. Also, the shape of the title, the style of the title provides an important additional information. So let's read the title. Why the 2022 Po River drought is the worst in the past 2 centuries. So from the title, we can understand that the paper focuses on drought events, which are, by the way, a reason of relevant concern nowadays. And in particular, the paper is focusing on drought events over the Po River, which is, as you know, the longest river in Italy and one of the most important rivers in our country, in the country of Italy. And besides the the subject, this title tells us, as I said, an important information. It is shaped in the form of a statement. And there are several ways a title can be formulated. Can be formulated by a simple description of the paper subject. So an alternative to the title that you now see on the screen may be Analysis of the 2022 Po River drought, or drivers of the 2022 Po River drought. This would be a simple explanation of the content of the paper. Or otherwise, the title can be framed, stated like a question, like, was the 2022 Po River drought really extreme? Or was the 2022 Po River drought caused by climate change? Or rather, was the 2022 Po River drought caused by irrigation? So can be a question, can be a description, can be a statement, like in this case. When you read a title like a statement, it means that the paper wants to be, in a way, ambitious, because a statement anticipates a key challenge, a key research challenge that the paper has tried to resolve. So when I read this title, I understand that first, the Po River drought was the worst in the past 2 centuries, the 2022 drought. And this is already a description of the subject. But besides that, I understand from the title that the paper also wants to explain why the Po River drought that occurred in 2022 was so severe. And I understand that this explanation of why the drought was so severe is a scientific one. So indeed, it's a title that is catching. And in fact, when we wrote this paper, we considered several different alternatives for the title. But then, given that we were targeting a journal with a high visibility, a journal with a very good reputation, and we tried the science, and then from science we were redirected to Science Advances. So you can understand, we were targeting a journal with a very good reputation. Therefore, we decided to make the title more ambitious, to highlight that we really believe that here we are providing a set of innovative contribution. We are first demonstrating that the 2022 drought was the most severe in the past 2 centuries. It's a very long time. And we wanted to say in the title that we have found a scientific explanation for it. So from the title, indeed, you can, as you see, get a lot of information. Now, the second thing that you see is the authors, the list of authors. This is another important information about a paper, because you can understand, first of all, the composition in terms of diversity. It is extremely important. It gives an important information. And for instance, in terms of diversity, I can understand that here it was an international team, and therefore, I mean, it means that it was not just a single person. It was a team work, and the fact that it's international indeed brings an added value. And we really wanted an international team because we wanted to compare different perspectives, and different geographical location means a different background, means a different culture, means a different perspective also on the way scientific research is carried out. And also, of course, the names of the authors convey to you an information that is relevant in terms of the identity of the authors, whether they work in a university, whether they work in a research center, whether they work in a governmental organization, and whether they are or are not already visible, very visible names. This doesn't imply that a paper is more interesting. The most interesting papers are written by young scientists or scientists that in any case are not widely known, but still the fact that the names of the authors are clearly visible is a useful information to understand, in a way, the perspective of the paper. And then there is the publication date, which is extremely important, reported here, because it's important because, of course, you want to look for recent information, or you may also want to look for historical information, but in this case, you have to place this information in the correct perspective in terms of timing, in terms of the period the paper was published. I am very interested in reading papers published 100 years ago, but of course, the eyes with which I read these papers are different. My perspective, my expectation is different. And I suggest to you an interesting exercise. If you're passionate about or you have motivations for reading papers, try to make a comparison between two papers focusing on the subject you are interested in, published one recently and another one 30, 50 years ago. And you will clearly understand the difference in the approaches, in the writing style, and it's very interesting. It's very interesting to understand what has been the evolution of science during the recent period. Then we have also the DOI specified here is a digital identifier which allows you to clearly and uniquely locate the paper. And very often this digital identifier is reported also in the list of references of the paper. So each paper nowadays needs to include in the list of references all the relevant contributions that the authors have studied and the authors have considered to get support for writing the paper, and any relevant contribution included in the list of references, very often it is required that is accompanied by the digital identifier. And then there is the abstract. The abstract is a very interesting part of the paper. And remember, when we will discuss how to write a paper, we will put a lot of emphasis on the shaping of the title and the abstract, because this is title and abstract is what a potential reader looks at to get the first information about the paper. And therefore, if you want to get the attention of the public, of your readers, and moreover, if you want to get the attention of the editor of the journal you are submitting to, it's extremely important that you carefully consider the abstract. In particular, when you read a paper, when you are looking for a paper, which is what we are focusing on now, it's extremely important that you realize the importance of the information included in the abstract and you learn how to read it. Of course, I mean, there are different ways of shaping the abstract. There are some authors that are very clear in the abstract, other authors that are not so clear. And it depends also on the field, it depends on the individual style of writing. So it is important that we realize how to read it. What I am expected to find in the abstract, and extended, but not too much extended. Remember, usually journals put a limitation on the length of the abstract. So I am expecting to find first an extended, but not too much extended, description of the background of the paper. So what is the motivation? A description of the contribution of this paper, maybe a description of the methods, and I am expecting also to find information on the innovative content of the paper. So when I read a new paper, usually I already am familiar with the topic, I look at the methods, so how the analysis was carried out, and I'm looking in the abstract for what's innovative here. And some abstracts, I would suggest the authors to include in them also an explanation of why the contribution is important. So when I look at the abstract, once again, I'm looking for the methods, the innovative contribution, and why the contribution is important. So let's read this abstract and all together, so we understand if indeed it reports what I'm looking for. So the causes of recent hydrological droughts and their future evolution under a changing climate are still poorly understood. This is the motivation, is the background. So there is a research gap. The research gap is that the causes of recent droughts and their future evolution under a changing climate are still poorly understood. Fine. Just one sentence, very short, the background is provided. Second sentence, banking on a 216 here river flow time series at the Po River outlet, we show that the 2022 hydrological drought is the worst event. I'm skipping the sentence included in parentheses. The worst event, part of an increasing trend in severe drought occurrence. So in a single sentence, I am saying that something about the method. I am analyzing a time series of Po River flows that is 216 years long. And there is an anticipation of the results. We show that the drought that occurred in 2022 is the worst. So the worst in more than 2 centuries. And there is a second anticipation of the results. This event is also due to an increasing trend in severe drought occurrence. You see, the sentence is very short, but it says a lot of things. Let's look at the parentheses. It is a quantification of the severity of the drought, 30% lower than the second worst. So it means that the 2022 drought is the worst and is 30% lower in terms of river flow than the second worst, with a 6th century return period. This specification is a bit technical, 6th century return period. It means that on average, we can expect that a drought like that occurs every 600 years. This is quite technical. Remember, it is not needed that you understand all the technical details of the abstract. If there are technical details, you can skip them. And then I usually, in my first reading of the papers, I skip the technical details because I am interested in the whole story. And the fact that the drought has a 600-year return period is not really part of the big story. It's a technical detail. You can skip it. You don't have to be concerned by understanding everything of what you read. It is just enough, more than enough, that you understand the whole story. Okay, so don't be concerned. If there are some details that you don't understand, that's fine. You have time to get better into them. Third sentence, it is providing more details on the results. The decline in summer river flows, let's skip the parentheses, again a technical detail, which is more relevant than the precipitation decline, is attributed to a combination of changes in the precipitation regime, resulting in a decline of snow fraction and snowmelt, and to increasing evaporation rate and irrigated areas. So it is, again, more details of the results. Okay, and they are interesting details, but actually it is a second level interest with respect to the previous sentence. It is something useful to understand the context. And then there is the last sentence, which is presenting the innovation and why the innovation is important. Our study presents a compelling case where the hydrological impact of climate change is exacerbated by local changes in hydrologic seasonality and water use. So here we are saying why it is important. It is a compelling case, so this is something of ambitious without becoming a jargon, where the hydrological impact of climate change, so it's an example of how climate change may cause problems, especially if there are other drivers of change that contribute to amplify the impact of climate change. In this case, we got precise instructions from the journal to write the abstract with one first sentence providing the background and how many sentences are dedicated to the description of methods, how many sentences to the anticipation of the results, and the type of concluding sentence. Not all the journals provide these indications, so actually what you find into an abstract may have different forms. The abstract can be shaped in many different contexts. And in any case, the fact that an abstract is clearly written and explains clearly the content of the study, why it is important, is an important information, because sometimes when I start reading the abstract of a new paper, I see that the abstract is clearly confused, and then in some cases I just decide not to read it, because if the abstract is already confused, it's an indication that maybe the paper is not responding to my expectation. And so pay attention to reading the abstract and try to read between the lines in order to get any type of information this important component of the paper delivers. The introduction. In what follows, I will not read everything in order to speed the process up, and I will try instead of reading together with you the paper as I usually read them in order to get my quick first pass. In a second occasion, we will discuss how to make the second pass, but for now, let's focus on the quick one. So the introduction, of course, it's extremely important to give additional details on the background of the paper, the motivation of the study, and the contribution. What I am expecting from the introduction is something more technical, because more details are given, something more technical on the methods and also the results. Again, I don't need in the first pass to understand everything. In particular, the technical details, we can forget them and eventually postpone their understanding to the second pass. So, the first sentence of the introduction usually provides additional details on the background and motivation for the paper. Here we read that the motivation of the paper is the severe meteorological drought that occurred during the first 7 months of the year 2022 over the large part of the European continent and therefore also on the area of the Po River Basin. And there are some details on the atmospheric conditions. In the second line, you see that you read that a persistent anomalous anticyclonic circulation over Europe determined the scarcity of rainfall, of precipitation in general. And in fact, it is specified in the second sentence that in particular in northern Italy, an extraordinary scarcity of precipitation occurred, contributing to triggering a drought event that has provoked very significant consequences. The other sentences until the end of the paragraph provide additional details on the consequences, on the impact of the drought over the north of Italy. Usually in my first read, I don't focus on these details, and I jump then to the second paragraph. Remember, when there is a change in the paragraph, when a new paragraph starts, it means that a different type of information is provided. So given that I am fine with the first paragraph with additional details on the drought, I jump to the second one. And indeed, what you read is that climate model projections for Europe indicate that meteorological droughts, due to lacking precipitation, will become increasingly more frequent and severe, especially in the second part of this century. And then there are details provided about these predictions by climate models. And there are also details, if you look here, on the analysis of historical data, which may confirm or not confirm the projections given by climate models. And then there is a mention to the challenge of identifying if indeed climate change is implying an exacerbation of the severity of droughts. And there are additional details on why this challenge is so relevant, why it is so challenging to estimate these trends. And therefore, usually I assume at this point that I understood what is delivered, what is described by the second paragraph, and I jump to the new one, because I understood what is the question the paper is trying to address by reading the first line of the second paragraph. And then I jump to the third paragraph. Here we answer these questions. So what is indeed the increase in severity of droughts that we may expect, and how to estimate here? I read that here we answer these questions by analyzing the longest record of the Po River discharge, namely a time series of monthly river flows, which starts from January 1807. So this, I understand, is already a paragraph describing the methods, how the severity of the drought is estimated, how the impact of climate change may be estimated. So what are the causes? Why the Po River drought of 2022 was so severe? And then I already learned that here the main focus of the paper is an analysis of this long series of historical data. I am an expert of the subject, and therefore I realized that a series of river flows that covers a period of more than 200 years is an exceptional piece of information. We have not many so long series at the global level in the world. We don't have many of them. So I understand what is the main interest of the paper. And then additional details are provided. We first focus on the spring-summer month. Okay, and then we locate the position of the 2022 seasonal flow values in the ordered samples to assess the extraordinary severity of the recent drought. So my understanding is that a long time series is analyzed. We look at the river flow in selected seasons, and we look at the severity of the 2022 drought by comparing the seasonal flows of 2022 with the seasonal flows of the whole time series. And this is enough for me. I already understood what is the methodology: time series analysis, comparison of what happened in 2022 with the previous history of the Po River. And then I jump to the last para, where I am expecting an anticipation of the results. We show that the magnitude of the 2022 drought is unprecedented in the past 2 centuries, And this event is part of a long-term trend characterized by an increase in the frequency and severity of droughts, particularly during the past decades. This is enough for me, and because it's already a good summary of what is the main outcome of the paper. And at this stage, I may decide to leave the paper because it doesn't match my interest, it's not what I am looking for, or I may decide to continue. And indeed, in several cases, because I browse a number of papers which exceeds the 500 per year, so about 2 papers per day. And in most of the cases, indeed, I just read abstract and introduction, and then I decide that it's not relevant to my interest. But in this case, it's relevant because we are interested in understanding why the Po River drought of 2022 was so severe, and in particular, I am interested in understanding whether in the future we may expect even more severity in terms of drought impact. Okay, so the next section jumps directly to the results. This is not the only structure that you may expect from a paper. Usually for journals hosting longer papers, after the introduction, they place the description of the data and the description of the methods. And they don't jump directly to the results. In this particular case, Science and Science Advances, and Nature as well, they prefer, after the introduction, to anticipate the results. It's a way to convey with a quicker solution, in a quicker way, what is the main finding of the paper. It is something that they want to immediately offer to the reader because they want to keep the attention of the reader. And because the audience of these journals, which are interdisciplinary journals, is often an audience that is more interested in the results rather than in the methods. More specific journals, for instance, regarding the subject, scientific journals focusing almost exclusively on hydrology, they prefer to give first the detail of the methods, because the very specific audiences, the very technical audiences are also very much interested in the methods and not only in the results. But in this case, we see that there is the section dedicated to the results. And then we see here, our analysis shows that the 2022 drought is a record-breaking event. And then there is the explanation of why it is a record-breaking event. And you see that there is a figure. And at this stage, the figure becomes very important. It becomes important because when you deliver technical details, only through the text, it may become something not immediately clear. So I am expecting that, in particular for a very generalist journal like Science or Science Advances, I am expecting that the presentation of the results is immediately accompanied by a figure in order to make the technical details clearer. And in fact, if you read the text here, you will find that the figure helps a lot, figure 1 helps a lot in summarizing the results. What can we see in this figure? We see 4 panels presenting 4 figures and a table. This is an example of a modern style of making figures. A modern style because we try recently to condense a lot of information, but at the same time in a clear way, in the figures we present. And in particular for this type of journals, which target a very general audience and interdisciplinary audience, it's important that the information is provided in a clear and very synthetic way. And I think this figure is a good example. Of course, I am biased because I made it. But what we wanted to do here is, first of all, for seasonal flows. What do I mean for seasonal? We first focused on the flows of July. So monthly flows in July. We have a series that is 207 years long. So I have 207 values of Po River flows in July. And it's the first column of the table with the symbol J. And then we focused on the flows in June and July. And we have, again, 207 values of flows in June and July, JJ. And then third column, May, June, July, MJJ. Fourth column, April, May, June, July, and AMJJ. And in each of these columns, we report the most severe years in terms of flow scarcity. So let's look at the first column. The most severe was 2022, given meaning that it was the year in the whole record with the lower flow. The second, first column, lower July flow was 2006. The third lowest July flow was 1945. Let's look at the second column, flows in June, July. The most severe was again 2022. The second most severe was 2006. The third one, 2005. Third column, May, June, July. Again, the most severe was 2022. Fourth column, April, May, June, July. Again, the most severe was 2022. And basically, this says that 2022 was indeed a bad year in terms of flow scarcity in all the seasons that we considered here. And you see that the table is giving colors which give the return period of the low flow that occurred in each year. Return period, once again, means the average time that we may expect to pass before a similar drought occurs again. And then you see that 2022 is characterized by a return period that is quite important. So it's ranging from something like 100 years to 600 years. And then as you go down in the rows of the table, of course, it becomes lighter, the color. And it becomes lighter because the return period, of course, is decreasing because the severity of the drought of the second worst, third worst, etc., is becoming lower. So basically from the table, we already understand that 2022 was really bad in terms of low flows, and it was the worst in the centuries. What do the four figures say? They present the progress along time from 1807 to 2022 of the seasonal flows. So let's look at the upper left, July. You see that there is a decreasing trend in the observation period. Here with light blue, you see the monthly flow values. And with the dark blue, you see a line that is it's a smoothed version of the light blue line, which means that we try to smooth the peaks in order to make the progress of the flows during time more regular. So July, indeed, is characterized by decreasing flows. June, July, same thing. And May, June, July, you see that there is still a decreasing trend, but is less evident. And April, May, June, July, it's less evident. So what these four figures say, that there is a decreasing trend, but it's more pronounced in July rather than in the whole spring series of river flows. So what could be the reason why the trend is more pronounced in July. This is something that emerges as an interesting question, an interesting scientific question from this figure. Just additional detail, in each of the 4 figures, you see reported the value in color ranging from light red to dark red, the value of the return of the river flow in the corresponding season. And the color is providing an estimate of the return period. So basically you see that in July 2022, the river flow was during the month 160, and in June, July, it was 209 and so forth. So you see there is a lot of information provided by this figure, which says that the 2022 drought was the worst one, which says this figure that there is indeed a decreasing trend in the summer flows of the Po River, but then the figure raises another question. So why the trend is more pronounced in the summer season with respect to the whole spring season. And then here there is an explanation of the trend in drought severity. This subsection refers to the figure 1, you see, and says, let's read the first sentence, that the 2022 Po River drought appears not to be an isolated event, but rather part of a declining trend in river flow. And then there are other details. And you see here a second figure, which should get our attention soon, because this second figure, as you can read in the text when the figure is referenced, tries to provide an answer to the question why the trend in summer is more pronounced with respect to the trend in the whole spring. And here you see an estimation of basically trends. Let's forget about the technical details, but you see that there is a picture of the mean river flow in June, July, upper panel, and some estimates of trends. And you see that there is indeed a decreasing trend during the observation period from 1807 to 2022. But if you look at the same figure, lower panel, river flows in February and March, impressively enough, you see that there is an increasing trend. And this is the answer to the previous question. So it seems like the river flow of the Po River increased during winter, early spring, for then decreasing in late spring, summer. So interesting, very interesting. And what is then the reason of that? And you see here that there is a discussion of the reasons for change in river flow seasonality. And then there is here first indication that it could be due to some seasonal change in climate. And then the first question is like, maybe the precipitation is changed. So maybe that it is the rainfall that is changed, seasonally changed. And then there is the presentation of discussion and presentation of a figure where we estimated the trends in precipitation over the Po River. And actually what we found is that you see in the different months there is not a clear decrease of precipitation. I'm not going into the details, but if you read this paper, which is not very technical, there is a quite comprehensible explanation that this figure confirms that there is no trend in precipitation. So the reason for the change, the seasonal change in river flow, increased in spring, decreased in summer, is apparently not due to a change in precipitation. And here we discuss also the kind of data that we analyzed and the methods that we use to analyze the data. So what is then the reason for the change in river flow? And then here there is a discussion of change in snowmelt and solid precipitation regime. And here we prove, with the aid also of a figure that is presented here below, we prove that it's not the precipitation that is changed, but rather the solid precipitation that is changed and the snowmelt. It means that due to the increase of temperature due to global warming, there is less snow over the Po River during the winter, and what snows is melt earlier than before. This means that the river flows during winter and early spring are increased because there is less snow over the catchment. Snow is like a storage of water. If snow is not accumulated or is melt soon, this means that water goes down and feeds the Po River, and therefore here is the reason why the river flow in winter and early spring is increased. But then this storage of snowmelt that is delivered downstream during winter is not available for summer. And this is, again, the reason why the summer flow is decreased. And this is the main finding of the paper. It's the fact that there is a change indeed in the seasonality of the Po River flows, implying an increase of the severity of summer droughts, and this change is due to global warming, which causes a decrease in solid precipitation, snow, and an anticipated snowmelt. Then there is this figure confirms that there is anticipated snowmelt, and then one may say, okay, but maybe that it's also a change in evaporation that is, after global warming, is causing this decrease of the river flow. And here we prove that evaporation is not changed much, and we explain what are the data that we have used to make this estimation. And then there is another possible explanation. Maybe that it's the fact that we take more water from the Po River during summer for irrigation that is causing the decrease. Actually, this explanation wouldn't explain why the river flow is increased during winter, but indeed it is worth exploring whether during summer the decreasing trend is also exacerbated, made more severe, because there is more water withdrawals. And then we explain that here we make an analysis. It's not easy to estimate water withdrawals, but our analysis, which is in a way a bit qualitative, proves that the change in water withdrawals is not really so significant. And therefore, there is now the discussion of the results, where we basically say that climate change, in terms of change in seasonality, is most probably the most convincing explanation for this trend in droughts. In the conclusion, we also point out that what is the future perspective? So what is our prediction for what will happen in the future? And then here we conclude by saying that looking forward, we expect that the ongoing global warming will exacerbate again the trends analyzed here. In turn, the superposition is likely to worsen the severity and frequency of hydrological droughts, possibly exceeding the magnitude of the 2022 event. And this calls for urgent search for solutions to mitigate the environment and societal risks, thereby ensuring the sustainability of ecosystem and water resources. This is our main conclusion. And here, according to the format required by the journal, the paper is finished. The way I read it together with you is usually the way I read new papers during my first pass. I look at the abstract in detail. I look at the introduction with less details. And then I try to distill the essence of the results without going into any detail, any technical detail, any detail related to methodology and solutions, etc. And I try to jump directly to the final message of the paper, because what I am expecting from a scientific paper is a concluding message, a take-home message. We call it take-home message, which is an important component for raising my interest. When I make, if I had to make a first read of a paper like this, which I don't know, I expect to jump to make this first pass in a time that is less than half an hour. Actually, it is very often less than 15 minutes. But less than half an hour is an indication that I think it's meaningful for you. This is when you are able to make the first pass of a paper that you don't know in less than half an hour, you can consider yourself a mature reader, an experienced reader. In fact, in the second video, I will make this exercise. I will read with you another paper which I didn't read before, and therefore we can test together indeed how I perform in a case that it's a good example to compare with your first experiences, because of course in this case of the paper we are discussing today, I am a co-author, and therefore you may say correctly that I am experienced, and therefore my reading was in a way already informed. Actually, we didn't finish to read this paper. You see that here there are the materials and methods. I already anticipated to you, this is the format of these journals. They want the presentation of the results soon because they want to keep the attention of the reader, and then presentation of materials and methods follows later. So they assume that the interested reader then will continue. But if a person is not directly interested, at least this person has got an anticipation of the results. And they estimate that it's more likely that the reader continues the reading and will benefit and cite the paper in follow-up researches. So materials and method are presented here. And here you see there is a presentation of the river flow time series. We are not reading it. But of course, if you are interested in getting more details of this Po River flow series, you may read. If you want to know how the series was reconstructed, because you understand that getting numbers that were observed in 1807, it's not so easy. Measurement instruments were different. So you may want to see if the measures that were taken at that time are comparable to the measures that are taken today. And then you may be interested in reading the materials and methods with more details. I'm not very interested. I assume I'm not very interested. So I'm just browsing what is described here. So the river flow time series, monthly precipitation, and monthly sectoral water withdrawals. Yeah, I may be interested in this, in monthly sectoral water withdrawal, because I may know that it's not easy to get this data. And so where they were retrieved from, and here I read that they are retrieved from the Global Gridded Monthly Sectoral Water Uses dataset. And here you see the references. It is something that we didn't discuss so far. In scientific papers, you assume that any statement that refers to previous results is corroborated by the indication of the paper where these results are presented. And here you see the numbers which refer to the reference list. We will see the reference list later. If I click here, I would be sent directly to the list of references. Let me see. For instance, if I open the link in a new page, and let's look here. I don't think it. Yeah, you see here 39, and this is the reference. Let's go back to the paper now. More details, retrospective period analysis. It is explained how we estimated the average time that is passing, we can expect to pass between another event with the severity of the 2022 drought occurs again. So retrospective period analysis, trend estimation, how did we estimate the trend, and climate data and trend analysis, water withdrawal, data and trend analysis. Okay, so there are these additional details to explain how we repeat, how we made the analysis. Remember, there is today an increasing request to authors of scientific papers to allow that their analysis is reproducible. So it's important that these descriptions indeed support the reproduction of the results by the reader. And in fact, it is also required that the data are made available, that the data that have supported your analysis. So I expect when I read a paper that everything is reproducible, and I expect to see the data. This is something that is increasingly required, the data, but in some cases you may see that the data are not available. We will discuss in our online lectures what are the conditions under which data are to be made available, what are the conditions when exceptions can be made. And then there is the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is something that I consider important. And here there is the acknowledgement of the contribution by other scientists other than the authors. Acknowledgement of founding. This is extremely important because first, the authors are required to acknowledge founding for their research activities. Second, it gives you an idea of the context. So was it project financed by public administrations or was it financed by the private sector? It's important. And also here it's required that the authors declare competing interest, and finally data and material availability. And you see here all data needed to evaluate the conclusions in the paper are present in the paper, so are already presented in the text, and all the supplementary material, something that we discuss now. Specifically, the monthly time series of the pore river flow is available in the Nodo, and here there is the address, and then there is the location links to the other data that we used. As you see, there is a supplementary material. What does this mean? Many journals, especially the top ones, have fixed limitations to the overall length of the paper, which means that you are required to write a text that is self-contained. And they say, if you have additional details to provide, you can attach a file as supplementary material. There are other journals who don't have any limitation in length, which may allow papers which are like 70 pages long to be published. But it is increasingly required that papers are self-contained, and therefore this option is given to include supplementary material. Let's see what is here the supplementary material. Let's try to download it, if it works. And you see that it's quite a long download. And then here we see the supplementary material. And basically they are figures, figures that are referenced in the text. So in the text, we made reference to these figures, which provide additional details. As you see, additional figures. You may also include in the supplementary material some additional details in the form of text. Here there are, actually, I forgot to mention tables, additional tables. And as I was saying, you can also include additional details through a text. And basically, that's it. And then finally, the list of the references. As I said, they are ordered here in order of presentation in the text. order in which they are cited in the text. And here you have all the details for finding these references in Google Scholar, Web of Science. Web of Science is another repository for scientific publications. Another with besides Google Scholar. Google Scholar is completely open. Web of Science, some services are not open, but Web of Science is available to most of the university libraries. So from inside the University of Bologna, you can also search papers through the Web of Science. Another very popular repository is Scopus by Elsevier. And that's it. And so we basically concluded the reading of the paper. There is also the opportunity to download the PDF if you want to download it and save it on your PC for offline reading. And the paper is presented in a different format, but it's identical to what we read earlier on the web. I hope that this is a good example, and let me share the screen and so that we can conclude this video with a final discussion. I hope the reading of the paper that again was quoted by me, so I am in a position that is the author position, so I'm not strictly speaking in the reader position. I try to emulate my role as a reader, but actually it's a particular case that I wanted to use in order to provide a more informed description of what is into the paper. And I hope it was a good example. And the take-home message is try to identify as soon as possible the most of the information you need from a paper in order to decide whether it deserves your in-depth reading. And an essential information is veiculated by, in the order, title, abstract, and at the end of the abstract, about 10% of the papers I start reading are discarded, not because they are not good, but just because they are not matching my interest. And then introduction. Already in the introduction, you may skip some of the sentences, and then final results. And if there is a discussion session, I also, if the paper survives to my scrutiny in terms of my interests, then I jump to the discussion section where I hope to see a take-home message. This is basically the essence of the information. And a side information is related to the importance of the figures and the importance of extracting from the figures the information that allows you to read the text more quickly. So basically, when I read, and this is also another take-home message for you, when a figure is referenced, try to read together at the same time text and figure. That's it for this first video. And again, I hope I have met your expectation. And next video will be dedicated to reading a paper for the first time, also for me and also for you. And, let's try with the next reading to benefit from what we learned in this first reading. I conclude by saying, remember, this is the first pass of the reading. Thanks a lot.